Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Cotton Reboot, High Tension. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Beep, Cotton Reboot High Tension released in July of 2025 for the PlayStation 4 and 5 and the Nintendo Switch, which is the version we're looking at today, though only in the Japanese region. The classic Shoot 'em Up is back. A direct sequel to 2021's Cotton Reboot, High Tension brings with it polished gameplay and new gameplay mechanics. This title is a bunch of solid fun. I've had a great time with this title so far, and it's an easy recommend, especially if you're a fan of the Cotton series. However, I would recommend waiting for the global release, as that'll make the title easier to obtain and a little bit cheaper for you as well. That's not to say that there aren't some issues with the game. At this point, I have encountered freezes with the title several times, so it is a bit on the buggier side, and I also take a little bit of issue with some of the controls, but I'll get to that in just a little bit. So overall though, it is a solid recommend from the chef. Finding ourselves at the main menu, we have three modes we can choose from. There's the story mode, which has cutscenes that the Cotton series is known for and done in the same style. Then you have arcade, which takes out the cutscenes and just gives you more of a straight arcade experience. And lastly, we have the time attack, which is available in two flavors, the 2-minute or the 5-minute variant. Then there's also the tutorial. This is basically a manual that explains the gameplay's mechanics. However, in the import version it is in Japanese only, so do keep that in mind. For our purposes today, we'll be showing the game off in arcade. Once you select your mode, you're taken to the character selection, and here you'll initially have two choices, Cotton and the new character Macaron. The differences between them you can see in the right there are their shot types. It's also possible to unlock additional characters, and there have been DLC characters also announced, though they aren't currently available. For our purposes, we will be showing the game off as Cotton. Selecting your character, if you're playing in story, you would be taken to your opening story cutscene. However, playing in arcade, we're dropped right into the game. And I just want to go and point out just how pretty the opening scene looks. So rather than that pixel look that the Cotton Reboot went with, we have more of a hand-drawn art present here in Cotton Reboot High Tension, and I really love the way the game looks. Some of the stages are a little on the dark side, but it does kind of fit that gothic theme that Cotton generally has, while still maintaining that shoot 'em up side as well. So as far as the mechanics are concerned, we have our primary shot, but unlike previous Cotton titles, things have changed a little bit with it. We no longer have the leveling mechanic that uses the experience from defeating enemies and collecting the crystals. Rather, it's always at the same power, so I really can appreciate that kind of gameplay. But there are some new differences. So we have some new mechanics, like the ability to capture enemies and use them for additional firepower. In addition to that, we also have the magic that the series is known for, as well as a new fever mechanic. And as far as the capture mechanic is concerned, there are different types of enemy shots you can potentially get from capturing enemies. So it's best to experiment, capture the enemies, and see which type of shots you enjoy using the most. It's also possible to use the captured enemies as projectiles, throwing them back with the capture shot. One thing that I do kind of take issue with is that the whole capture mechanic is on the same button as the game's magic. So the magic is still present here from previous Cotton titles, and the way that works is if you go and press the magic button, then you'll get your magic based off of what you see there in the bottom right, and it'll go and be your right, the magic goes from right to left, although the power-ups as you pick them up, like this one here, will go and fill in from right to left as well. It's possible to still level up the magic, however, and those do level up with the crystals, so that's something to keep in mind. Here we do go and see our first mini-boss, but let's start talking about some of the new mechanics. So as we shoot through crystals in the game, you can see here that our shot goes and forks into these green shots, and when those hit the enemies, one of the things it goes and does is it generates the meter in the bottom of the screen, the fever meter. However, when you activate that fever mode, If the shots go and pass through the crystals and hit an enemy, then they'll generate willows, the candies that Cotton is known for loving so much, and those will fly back into Cotton. In addition to that, they'll also generate tons of bonus points, and they'll level up. The more of the willows you've collected, the higher they get, starting at level 1 at a multiplier of 64, and then at level 5 at a multiplier of 1024. But there's even additional mechanics to that as well. It's possible through collecting enough willows that you'll enter a high tension state, and in that high tension state, those points are even doubled, and it's possible to level up the magic one step further. So instead of just going with a level 3 as our maximum, there's actually a level 4. As far as the magics are concerned, so we have our fire dragon magic, there's also still the lightning magic, we have bomb magic, and there's also kind of let's see, the green one isn't wind this time, it's kind of like this more life miracle one where the things are kind of a little bit different. You also have the ability to use the fairy version of the magic, and that will once again change depending on which magic you're using. For example, if we're using the fairy version of the fire magic, then the fairies ignite and they charge at the enemy, going and dealing damage directly that way. The lightning magic will go and generate a shield. The green magic will give you an increase in the rate that the fever and the high tension meter generates, so that's something to keep in mind. But now that we've defeated the first boss, we're now encountering Tea Time, the bonus that's always been in the Cotton games. But I love the addition that they've made to this new one. So collecting enough teacups will actually level up the whole teacup mechanic. And when they level up, they also change colors to these awesome looking teacups. It's something that's simple, but it's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about this particular update. Once you complete the stage and your tea time, you get a quick summary of your score bonuses, and we move on to the next stage. So now let's try and explain a little bit more about the high tension mechanic a little bit better. So as I was saying, as we shoot through the crystals, we're generating our fever meter. Once we activate the fever, if you are collecting enough willows, basically hitting enough enemies with the shots that are passing through the crystals, will enter a high tension state. Tension, as it says there, so it's spelled a little bit wrong in the screen there at the bottom. And in that state, you can continue to be in fever as long as you continue to collect willows. So you'll keep a point where you're doubling the point value of the willows that you're collecting, as well as having a more powerful shot. Although, at the same time, the enemies themselves do get more powerful when you're in fever and high tension state, so keep that in mind. But some areas of the game, it's actually really easy to go and build up that meter and maintain it, such as right here, as there's an enemy or something that's counting as an enemy that we can shoot and keep ourselves in that high tension, high point state for a long period of time. And that's one of the things that really allows for, is it allows for some really high scoring gameplay, and it's just a lot of fun to use. However, it's kind of a little bit tricky to go and understand how best to go and build that up. So as far as what I would recommend for maintaining that, although it's tempting to grab the crystals as soon as they're on the screen, the crystals are what enable us to build up the fever and the high tension meters. So with that in mind, you probably want to keep them there and then plan when to use that when you have a lot of enemies on screen. So that when our shots that are passing through the crystals are hitting enemies, they're hitting a lot of enemies, and preferably bigger ones that will actually can go and take some serious damage. That will ultimately help you build up the tension meter and get the highest points. And also, you'll want to plan when you're using your magic as well, since you do get that higher level magic when you're in that over-tension state. There's also some bonus items that you can unlock through shooting the screen itself. In certain places you'll find either food items or other point items that like the various characters in the game itself, the Fairy Silk, Cotton herself, Macaron, so keep your eyes out for those. And I do love the way those look, although they're more of a 3D look rather than the hand-drawn look that the enemies and our characters go and have for those particular items. They still look good, and they make me want things like melon sodas and strawberry shortcakes, so I can definitely appreciate that. So we're just about to our next mid-stage boss, and that's one of the things that you can go and see here, is the game itself actually has some really good length stages. So there are 6 full-length stages and then a boss-only stage at the end of the gameplay loop that we'll be playing through, and all of the 6 stages have a fair bit of length to them. So if you're looking for a shoot 'em up that does have some good length, keep that in mind. And you have various characters to play through it, so there is some decent replayability here. That does help go and provide for a little bit of a good reason for the price point that the game is asking for. And with that, we basically find ourselves at the end of Cotton served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, my biggest issues are that I've had a couple of situations where I've encountered some frustrating freezes with the game, where in one example is I was fighting a boss with Macaron, and between the boss phase transitions, it just simply froze, and the boss was just in an animation repeating forever. The background was still scrolling, the music was still playing, but I couldn't go and do anything save for press start and ultimately end that run. It was very disappointing, as that was later in the game itself. So I do hope that they do patch that up. Then another issue I have is with the way that the buttons are configured. So we have a button that will allow us to throw the captured enemies forward as a capture shot. But other than that, all the other mechanics that involve the fairies and the magic are all on one button. So the way that works is a short press gives you your magic spell. Slightly longer press will allow you to capture an enemy, like so, and a long press, once we've tossed our enemy, we'll go and activate the fairy magic, which in this case gives us the bonus to our growth rate for the fever and the tension. Where we have a capture shot, it would have been so easy to just add the capture for the capture mechanic for the fairies to that one button, and so you wouldn't have to be pressing multiple buttons or multiple different types of button presses on the same button to activate your magic. But on the plus flavors, so one thing I haven't mentioned is the game has an additional soundtrack to it. So it has 2 soundtracks. One that's a classic C soundtrack that's kind of fits the gameplay pretty well. Not classic as in classical music, but classic as in classic Cotton. But we also have a chiptune soundtrack, which I think is absolutely amazing, from the group YMCK. So if you're looking for some good chip tunes, then definitely that version of the soundtrack is the way to go for sure. Then that new fever mechanic is a lot of fun to play with once you understand it. It's not very easy to figure out what's going on initially, and even the Japanese manual itself isn't very clear with how the whole fever mechanic works, at least in my opinion. That new tea time mechanic is also something that I just love seeing. Going and changing up that mini game that you always have in the Cotton series is a great way to experience the title itself. The game itself is also a great score attack with the high tension mode. You can definitely rack up some crazy points, and if you know how to go and use it, like this boss for example, we can basically maintain the overtension state the entire fight for some huge points. You can just go and see my score total just ratcheting up, and before long you're all finding yourself going and topping high scores. This one's going to go and be a great one to compete on leaderboards for. And lastly, it's just great to go and have another new Cotton and a really solid horizontal scrolling shoot 'em up. So if you enjoy the Cotton series and horizontal scrollers, this is definitely one I recommend, though as I mentioned, I would probably recommend just waiting for the global release rather than taking the option to import it whether digitally or physically. As far as that's concerned, generally it seems like the Cotton titles take about 4 or 5 months between their Japanese release before they release globally, so we don't have a whole lot of time to go and wait before we'll go and see that release. And with that, we find ourselves at the end of this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, we want to thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.